Lisa M. Trocchia-Balkits is an interdisciplinary scholar whose work blends sociology, communication studies, and environmental thought, focusing on the social and ecological meanings of food. She earned her PhD from Ohio University in 2017 through the Individual Interdisciplinary Program, where her dissertation, A Hipstory of Food, Love, and Chaosmos at the Rainbow Gathering of the Tribes, explored how communal food practices at countercultural gatherings foster cooperation, reciprocity, and resistance to capitalist systems. Her background reflects both academic rigor and personal engagement with alternative communities, emphasizing experiential and sensory approaches to research. Trocchia-Balkits' writing style merges ethnography with creative nonfiction, demonstrating her interest in performative scholarship and in how everyday acts, particularly sharing food, can reshape relationships between people, culture, and the natural world. This dissertation is a plain English look at how a huge, leaderless campout, the 2016 Rainbow Gathering in Vermont, manages to feed thousands of people every day without selling food or using formal authority. The author lived on site and observed that dozens of volunteer kitchens and camps coordinate through trust and sharing, showing how food isn't just a meal, but a way people bond, feel a sense of belonging, and organize themselves, what she calls the performance and affect of food, including the role of love. She highlights three simple ideas: food as lived experience, the practice of self-organizing, and complex reciprocity, helping without keeping score, and shows how these create real order out of apparent chaos at a gathering with no bosses or permits. In short, it argues that shared food spaces can build community, enable cooperation at scale, and offer a practical alternative to pay-to-eat systems in everyday life. In the prologue, Lisa Trocchia-Balkits recounts her first journey to a rainbow gathering in Michigan, describing it as both a physical trip and an emotional initiation into a new kind of community. Exhausted after days of work at an art festival, she and her friends drive for many hours through forests, following vague directions until signs, like rock cairns and tie-dyed ribbons, guide them to the remote site. Along the way, she reflects on how fatigue blurs reality and opens her senses to new possibilities. When they finally arrive, they encounter a camp, the chaotic outer edge of the gathering, populated by rougher, marginalized figures. This introduction sets the tone for the dissertation, a sensory, honest exploration of human connection, improvisation, and the tension between idealism and reality within a self-organized community centered on shared food, freedom, and belonging. A permeable introduction sets the stage for the dissertation by explaining how the author approaches food, not just as something people eat, but as something that shapes relationships, communities, and values. She introduces three main touchstones that guide the study. First, food as embodied performance, meaning that cooking, sharing, and eating are lived experiences that express identity and connection. Second, the praxis of self-organizing, which looks at how people at the Rainbow Gathering create order without leaders or money. And third, complex reciprocity, a system where people give and receive freely without expecting direct repayment. The chapter weaves philosophy, sensory experience, and social theory to show that food acts as a binding force, a ligament that connects individuals and communities. The final section, Roy G. Biv, uses the metaphor of a rainbow to symbolize the diversity, fluidity, and interconnectedness of these themes, reflecting both the literal and symbolic meaning of the Rainbow Gathering itself. Complex interdisciplinarity explains the author's toolkit and plain language plan. She mixes ideas from several fields to study food at the Rainbow Gathering as part of a social ecology, meaning she looks at how growing, sharing, and cleaning up food link people, culture, and the environment in one living system. She defines food systems in everyday terms as all the moving parts, from production to cooking to waste, and contrasts this with today's industrial, corporate model to show why local, community-based approaches matter. She uses sensory ethnography to pay attention to how food feels and affects people, and performativity to show how repeated acts like cooking and eating together shape identity and community. She frames the gathering's leaderless coordination as self-organizing, where order can emerge from apparent chaos as thousands feed one another without bosses or money. Finally, she details complex reciprocity, a trust-based give and take that doesn't keep score and even interacts with the wider capitalist world, for example, using recovered surplus food, to highlight practical alternatives to pay-for-service systems. She closes the chapter by laying out 2 research questions that run through the rest of the work. Always free is the author's honest look at herself as part of the story she's studying. She explains that reflexivity, being aware of her own role, feelings, and biases, is essential because she isn't just observing the rainbow gathering, she's also a longtime participant, or insider. In Who Is That Hippie in the Mirror? She reflects on her identity within the counterculture, admitting that her closeness to the community gives her deep insight, but also affects how she interprets what she sees. In the section on bias, she acknowledges that no research is entirely objective, and that her personal beliefs and experiences inevitably shape her understanding, but she approaches this with honesty and transparency, rather than pretending to be neutral. Finally, Mediated Organizing looks at how the Rainbow family now uses online tools like Facebook and email lists to plan and communicate, which changes the gathering's traditionally word-of-mouth, person-to-person style. This shift raises new tensions between freedom and surveillance, reminding readers that even countercultural groups must navigate the digital world's limits and risks. In Finding Main Trail, the author traces how the Rainbow Gathering grew out of earlier countercultural experiments in communal living and free cooperation. She connects the gathering's spirit of self-organization and generosity to groups like the Diggers, 1960s activists in San Francisco, who set up free stores and free kitchens to give away food and goods as political and moral acts of sharing, rather than selling. The Shared Vision section explains how these ideas evolved into a broader philosophy, a belief that love, freedom, and collective care could create small, temporary utopias that challenge mainstream consumer culture. The next section, Vortex 1, Roots of the Rainbow, recounts the 1970 Oregon Festival that directly inspired the first Rainbow Gathering, where thousands of people came together peacefully during a time of political tension and war protests. That event proved large-scale cooperation without leaders or money was possible. Altogether, these sections show how the Rainbow family's ideals of free food, mutual aid, and harmony with nature emerged from a mix of activism, idealism, and lived experiments in freedom, a lineage of radical generosity stretching from the 1960s to today. Vortex 1, Roots of the Rainbow explains how the first Rainbow Gatherings grew out of a 1970 event in Oregon called Vortex 1, a state-sponsored peace festival created to prevent violent protests during President Nixon's visit. A small group of peace activists and counterculture figures, later known as part of the Rainbow family, helped organize the festival, which brought together tens of thousands of people in a spontaneous, cooperative environment built on mutual aid, free food, and nonviolence. The success of Vortex I showed that large groups could live, work, and celebrate together without formal leaders or commercial systems, relying instead on shared responsibility and trust. The experience inspired many to carry the same vision forward, leading to the first Rainbow Gathering soon after, grounded in the same ideals of peace, community, and free cooperation. The author traces how the Rainbow Gathering's ideals, peace, cooperation, and free community, spread and adapted over time. In other threads, she explains that the Rainbow movement drew from many influences, including the 1960s peace movement, Native American spiritual practices, and Back to the Land experiments, all woven together into a shared vision of living simply and harmoniously with nature. Global Rainbow shows how these gatherings expanded beyond the United States into an international network, with similar events taking place across Europe, South America, and beyond, each shaped by local cultures, but grounded in the same non-hierarchical and love-centered philosophy. Finally, in Resistance, a Rainbow movie, she highlights how the gatherings have also become acts of peaceful resistance to mainstream systems of control, offering a lived alternative to capitalism and state authority, and how this spirit of resistance is expressed in art, storytelling, and film that celebrate the rainbow ethos of love, freedom, and community as a countercultural way of life. Global Rainbow describes how the Rainbow Gathering movement expanded from its U.S. origins in the early 1970s into an international phenomenon, with gatherings now held on every continent. As the author explains, these events, whether in Europe, South America, Asia, or Africa, follow the same basic principles of peace, free food, non-commercial exchange, and consensus-based community, but each reflects the local culture and environment where it takes place. The global spread shows how the rainbow ethos, living cooperatively, respecting the earth, and building temporary communities without money or hierarchy, resonates across diverse societies. Despite cultural differences, what unites these gatherings is a shared commitment to mutual care, creative freedom, and love as a guiding value, proving that the rainbow vision can take root almost anywhere people want to live differently, even if only for a short time. In Plugging In, the author shifts from history to hands-on participation, describing how she physically and socially immerses herself in the Rainbow Gathering's daily life by volunteering in its communal kitchens. The section Kitchens and Food Systems explains how these kitchens are the heart of the gathering, self-organized, volunteer-run spaces that feed thousands of people every day without using money or formal leadership. Each kitchen operates independently, yet cooperates with others, sourcing food through donations, reclaimed waste, or communal supply runs. Together, they form a living food system that mirrors the gathering's values of sharing, trust, and care for the land. The author uses this to show how food acts as both nourishment and social glue, demonstrating that large-scale cooperation and sustainability are possible outside of traditional, profit-driven systems. The 2016 Vermont Gathering is Lisa Trocchia's ethnographic centerpiece, a detailed sensory account of her fieldwork at the Rainbow Gathering of the Tribes, held in Vermont's Green Mountains in 2016. She begins by situating the event within a secluded natural setting, describing how thousands of people converge on national forest land to build a temporary village from scratch. Paths wind through the woods and meadows, connecting camps, kitchens, and communal spaces. There are no signs, no advertisements, no ticket booths, just trails worn by footsteps and marked by handmade signs. The author presents the gathering as both chaotic and beautifully self-organized, a massive experiment in cooperation where strangers collectively construct infrastructure for food, water, sanitation, and healthcare without official direction or money. Her descriptions immerse the reader in the sounds, smells, and atmosphere of the place: drumming circles at night, the smell of wood fires, and the hum of constant human movement. She then explains how food lies at the heart of the social order. The gathering's roughly 120 encampments and kitchens serve as small communities that feed thousands of attendees each day. Through maps and field notes, Trocchia-Balkits illustrates how these kitchens, each with creative names like Fat Kids, Magic Bowl, Stock Pot, and Shining Light, form a complex web of cooperation and reciprocity. While each kitchen is autonomous, they collectively uphold the rainbow ethic of always free, meaning that food, water, and care are freely given without expectation of payment. She emphasizes how the kitchens are not only logistical centers, but emotional and spiritual spaces, where people bond through the acts of cooking, serving, and eating together. The kitchens open, communal fires replace private stoves, and shared meals replace private dining, reinforcing the gathering's rejection of individualism and private ownership. In describing specific kitchens, the author highlights the creativity and diversity of approaches. For example, some kitchens specialize in hearty vegetarian meals, others in tea, soup, or fresh fruit. Some focus on serving families, while others cater to young travelers or spiritual groups. Each kitchen has its own rhythm and culture, but all are bound by an ethic of cooperation and love. She shows how consensus and informal leadership emerge organically. Decisions are made through conversation and shared work rather than through authority. Even something as simple as discouraging personal campfires becomes a social statement about safety, environmental care, and community, illustrating how moral and ecological principles are lived out in practice. Trocchia-Balkits also situates the Vermont Gathering within broader social and political contexts. She notes that, despite its peaceful and ecological intentions, the Rainbow family often faces heavy policing and surveillance. Law enforcement agencies monitor gatherings closely, sometimes with intimidation tactics or arrests for minor infractions. This tension between state authority and non-hierarchical community highlights the Rainbow Gathering's role as both a social experiment and a quiet form of resistance. The gathering becomes a living example of what she calls prefigurative politics, enacting the kind of cooperative, egalitarian society participants want to see in the wider world. In To Begin, How Do I Know? The opening of Chapter 4, Hipstory of Food, Love, and Chaosmos, Trocchia reflects on how knowledge is created through lived, sensory experience rather than detached observation. She questions what it means to know something in an environment like the Rainbow Gathering, where emotion, embodiment, and intuition are as important as logic or theory. Drawing from phenomenology and performative writing, she explains that understanding food, community, and love in such a setting requires full participation, touching, tasting, feeling, and being part of the rhythms of the place. Her research, then, is not about collecting data from a distance, but about immersing herself in the flow of everyday life at the gathering, acknowledging that truth can emerge from feeling and doing as much as from thinking. This section sets the tone for the chapter's hybrid approach, blending creative narrative and scholarly reflection to convey knowledge that is deeply human and sensory. In the section Broken, Lisa Trocchia writes a deeply personal and sensory account that blurs the line between memoir and ethnography. She describes a moment of emotional and physical exhaustion at the Rainbow Gathering, using the word broken to capture not only her own fatigue, but also the vulnerability that comes with being fully immersed in communal life. Rather than treating this as weakness, she reframes brokenness as a necessary state for transformation, an opening that allows connection, empathy, and understanding to flow in. Through the imagery of shared meals, music, and human contact, she illustrates how the gathering's atmosphere of acceptance and love helps heal personal and collective wounds. The section emphasizes that research, like community, isn't built from perfection or control but from honesty, surrender, and the courage to be present amid imperfection. In Privilege and Fear, Trocchia reflects on her awareness of social privilege and vulnerability while living among the diverse participants of the Rainbow Gathering. She acknowledges that, as a middle-class academic and white woman, she experiences a kind of safety and acceptance that many others at the gathering, especially young, homeless, or marginalized attendees, do not. Her reflections are prompted by encounters with groups such as the A-Camp community and the Street Kids, whose struggles with poverty, addiction, and exclusion make her confront her own discomfort and fear. Trocchia-Balkits admits that while the gathering preaches universal love and equality, it still mirrors real-world inequalities, and she must reckon with the limits of her empathy and courage. When she finds herself afraid to approach a rowdy camp at night, she recognizes how easily privilege shelters people from hardship, and how fear can separate even well-intentioned individuals from the ideals they believe in. Ultimately, the section becomes a meditation on humility, understanding that love, safety, and belonging at the gathering are unevenly distributed, and that real solidarity requires facing fear and privilege honestly. In the section INFO, Lisa Trocchia describes one of the Rainbow Gathering's most vital communal spaces, the Information Center, known simply as INO. This camp acts as the communication hub of the gathering, a kind of living bulletin board where people share directions, news, and messages instead of relying on technology or formal organization. Through her time volunteering there, Trocchia-Balkits experiences INFO as a space of constant exchange, where strangers become guides, friends, and caretakers for one another. The camp embodies the gathering's values of trust, openness, and collective problem-solving, showing how order can arise naturally from cooperation. She portrays info as both a literal and symbolic center. It keeps the community connected without hierarchy or money, proving that information and care can circulate freely when people take responsibility for one another. At the same time, her interactions there reveal the human side of this ideal, moments of confusion, improvisation, and kindness, that together form the social heartbeat of the gathering. In Don't Touch Your Thing to the Thing, Trocchia blends humor and ethnographic observation to explore how hygiene, boundaries, and shared responsibility are managed in a massive, money-free outdoor community like the Rainbow Gathering. The title refers to a bit of camp wisdom, both practical and funny, used to remind people to keep personal hygiene items and bodily functions separate from communal water and food sources. Through vivid, down-to-earth storytelling, she shows how the gathering's informal systems of education, peer correction, and humor replace formal rules or enforcement. People teach one another how to protect the land, the kitchens, and each other by turning everyday sanitation into a shared ethic of care. The section also reveals how laughter and gentle teasing diffuse tension, allowing the group to uphold health and respect without shame or authority. In essence, this part captures how the gathering turns even the messy realities of communal living into opportunities for learning, connection, and collective responsibility. In Shining Light, Lisa Trocchia focuses on one of the most active and inspiring communal kitchens at the Rainbow Gathering, aptly named Shining Light. She joins the kitchen's crew to chop vegetables and observe how it operates, discovering a space that is both highly organized and profoundly human. The kitchen's leader, Lucid, explains that their team feeds roughly 1,000 people a day and views food not only as nourishment but as a tool for empowerment and awareness. Through her participation, Trocchia-Balkits experiences how consensus decision-making, trust, and shared labor create a sense of belonging and purpose among strangers. Shining Light embodies the gathering's ethos of cooperation and resistance. It runs entirely on volunteer energy, uses donated or reclaimed food, and centers love and community rather than profit or hierarchy. The atmosphere, filled with music, laughter, and spiritual energy, reveals how something as ordinary as cooking together can become a transformative act of connection and hope. In this scene, food preparation becomes a ritual of collective care and a tangible example of the gathering's larger ideal, that mutual aid and compassion can sustain a whole community. In Socks, Rhythm, and Kirtan, Trocchia captures the sensory and emotional atmosphere of the Rainbow Gathering through the interweaving of simple daily actions, like putting on socks, with the communal rhythms of song, movement, and devotion. The section centers on a visit to Calm, the Center for Alternative Living Medicine, a healing camp where practical care and spiritual energy blend naturally. Nearby, the sounds of Kirtan, a form of ecstatic call and response singing, fill the air as people gather under a tent after sharing food. Trocchia-Balkits describes the way the crowd moves, sways, and sings together, losing track of individuality as joy and connection ripple through the group. She writes with a sensory richness that conveys how music, food, and presence combine to create an atmosphere of shared emotion that feels transcendent yet grounded in everyday acts. The section's title reflects this interplay. Socks symbolize the ordinary, embodied realities of living in the woods, while Rhythm and Kirtan represent the spiritual and emotional heartbeat of the community. Together, they show how the Rainbow Gathering fuses the mundane and the sacred, turning daily life into an ongoing, joyful ritual of belonging. Yeastman profiles a recurring figure at the gathering's main circle dinners, an older attendee in a yeast shirt who walks the serving line shouting yeast, and sprinkling nutritional yeast onto people's bowls on request. His simple ritual, circulating as kitchens serve from the center of the circle, adds flavor and nutrients while informally teaching newcomers what nutritional yeast is. The vignette illustrates how small, repeated acts and recognizable roles, food as conduct, help organize communal eating, communicate norms, and build shared identity without formal rules or leaders. In The Gift, Lisa Trocchia reflects on the deep emotional and social meaning of giving within the Rainbow Gathering's money-free culture. Drawing on her lived experiences, she describes how generosity, whether through food, labor, or simple kindness, creates bonds that feel sacred rather than transactional. A shared meal, a handmade object, or a gesture of care becomes a gift that carries love, trust, and mutual recognition instead of obligation. She connects this to the anthropological idea of the gift economy, where giving circulates value and belonging through relationships rather than profit. Within the gathering, every act of giving reinforces the community's moral foundation. People care for one another because they want to, not because they expect something in return. Through this lens, the gift becomes both literal and symbolic, a reflection on how generosity transforms not just material exchange, but also the emotional fabric of communal life, revealing how love and reciprocity sustain the gathering's fragile yet enduring social harmony. In Does a Rainbow End? Trocchia brings her study full circle by reflecting on what the Rainbow Gathering means, both as a real event and as a symbol of hope, cooperation, and love. She revisits her key ideas: food as performance, self-organization, and complex reciprocity, showing how these continue to shape her understanding of human connection and community, even after leaving the gathering. In The Cornerstone, she identifies love and cooperation as the moral and emotional foundation, the cornerstone of the Rainbow Vision, suggesting that these principles can guide real-world social change beyond the festival's temporary setting. In The Creative Process, she describes how drawing maps, writing vignettes, and using art helped her process the sensory and emotional layers of her experience, turning fieldwork into self-discovery and artistic creation. Finally, in limitations, she acknowledges that both her research and the gathering itself are imperfect. Her insider position shapes her perspective, and the community's utopian goals face challenges like inequality, environmental strain, and miscommunication. Yet she concludes that the Rainbow Gathering spirit, its faith in love, trust, and shared food, remains a powerful glimpse of what a more compassionate and cooperative world might look like. In Questions Answered, the author concludes that the communal kitchens at the Rainbow Gathering are the heart of the event because they embody cooperation, generosity, and shared purpose. They transform food from a commodity into a social and emotional bond, teaching participants how to organize themselves without hierarchy or money. Working and eating together gives people a sense of empowerment and belonging, showing that communities can thrive on trust and mutual care rather than control or profit. She argues that these non-commercial, self-organized food systems have broader potential as models for social resistance and humanitarian aid, since they turn nourishment into an act of solidarity. Similar principles, she notes, have appeared in activist movements and disaster relief efforts, where free, collective meals provide stability, equality, and hope, demonstrating that food, when shared freely, can be both a form of resistance and a foundation for compassionate community. What is experienced as the value of the kitchens at the Rainbow Gathering explains that the true value of the Rainbow Gathering's kitchens goes far beyond simply providing food. For most people she spoke with, the word that best described their experience was together. The kitchens are the heartbeat of the gathering, a place where people come to connect, work side by side, share stories, make music, and feel part of something larger than themselves. Tasks like chopping vegetables, hauling water, and cleaning dishes become acts of community, where everyone contributes what they can and learns how to cooperate without being told what to do. Through this daily teamwork, participants experience what it feels like to live in a society without bosses, money, or rigid roles, and many describe this as deeply empowering. Trocchia-Balkits also points out that each kitchen reflects the personality and values of the people who run it. Some cook creative or symbolic meals, like sushi made by the New York Purple Gang, while others, like Stockpot, use reclaimed or donated ingredients as a form of protest against waste. But in all cases, the food is free and available to anyone, erasing social divisions that often come with money or class. Eating together becomes a performance of equality, care, and belonging. She concludes that these kitchens show how people can organize themselves successfully through trust and generosity, rather than control or profit. They create a small-scale example of what a fairer, more compassionate world could look like. Even though the gathering still depends partly on resources from the outside world, it offers a real-life experiment in living differently. For most who experience it, the kitchen is not just a place to eat. It's a living lesson in cooperation, kindness, and the power of shared food to build community. In And What of Love? Lisa Trocchia reflects on how love, spoken about constantly at the Rainbow Gathering, is not just an emotion but a way of living and relating to others. She observes that love is woven into every aspect of the gathering, from the way people greet each other, loving you, to how they share food, care for strangers, and treat the land with respect. Rather than being romantic or sentimental, this kind of love is about compassion, generosity, and connection, the idea that every action can be guided by care for others. She admits that, at first, the open displays of affection and positivity felt naive or uncomfortable, but over time she came to see how they create a powerful sense of belonging and emotional healing. Love, she concludes, is the unspoken force that sustains the community, turning daily acts of cooperation and kindness into a shared spiritual practice that makes the gathering feel like family. In the conclusion and future research sections, Lisa Trocchia ties together everything her dissertation has explored about food, love, and cooperation at the Rainbow Gathering, showing how these experiences reveal what she calls a social ecology of food. She reflects that her time cooking, eating, and living among thousands of people in a leaderless, money-free community demonstrated how food is more than nourishment. It's a tool for organizing society, creating trust, and building emotional and spiritual connections. By participating in the gathering rather than just observing it, she learned that knowledge can come from the body and the senses, not just from analysis or data. The gathering, to her, is both a real event and a metaphor for human potential. It shows that large groups of people can live peacefully, take care of each other, and care for the land without relying on authority or profit. Trocchia-Balkits emphasizes that the kitchens, in particular, are powerful examples of how food can perform social and political work. They prove that systems of mutual aid and complex reciprocity, where people give freely without expecting anything in return, can actually function at scale. The experience of cooking together transforms abstract ideals like community and love into tangible, lived realities. At the same time, she acknowledges that these systems exist in tension with the outside world. The gathering relies on supplies from the capitalist economy, and its egalitarian ideals sometimes clash with real-world differences in privilege, labor, and power. Yet these imperfections make it even more valuable as a site for learning, an evolving experiment in what it means to build a cooperative society in a modern context. In the contributions section, she explains how her work adds to academic and practical understandings of social organization. By blending critical theory, ethnography, and creative writing, she demonstrates that research about food and community doesn't have to be detached or purely analytical. It can also be emotional, sensory, and participatory. Her Hipstory approach connects lived experience with scholarly insight, bridging the gap between storytelling and theory. This contributes to the fields of food studies, anthropology, and sustainability, by showing how collective food practices can generate both material and emotional resilience. She also suggests that the gathering model has real-world relevance for community activism, disaster relief, and grassroots organizing, where free, self-organized food systems often emerge as a foundation for care and resistance. Looking toward future research, Trocchia-Balkits encourages further exploration of how similar food-centered, self-organized communities function in different settings, such as urban gardens, protest movements, and mutual aid networks. She calls for studies that continue to blend art, emotion, and science to better understand how human cooperation and empathy shape sustainable living. Most importantly, she believes that researchers and activists alike should take seriously the lessons learned at places like the Rainbow Gathering, that generosity, creativity, and love can be practical forces for building more just and compassionate worlds. Her dissertation closes on a hopeful note, suggesting that while the Rainbow Gathering itself is temporary, its values, freedom, cooperation, and care through food offer enduring inspiration for reimagining how humans might live together. Guidelines for Participation outlines the Rainbow Gathering's shared principles for living together peacefully and respectfully during the event. Written in plain, community-oriented language, it serves as a kind of collective code of conduct that replaces formal rules or enforcement. The guidelines remind everyone to care for the land, leaving no trace, protecting water sources, and using composting toilets, to respect others, and to act with love, patience, and cooperation. They also emphasize that every person is responsible for helping the gathering succeed by contributing in whatever ways they can, from cooking and cleaning to keeping the space safe and clean. The overall message is that the gathering works only if everyone participates with mindfulness, generosity, and respect for nature and one another, making the event a living example of harmony through shared responsibility rather than control. Select pages from Rainbow Mini Manual reproduces portions of a small handbook that the Rainbow family distributes at gatherings to help newcomers understand how the community functions. The manual offers practical advice, such as how to camp safely, protect water sources, and manage waste, alongside reminders of the gathering's core values: peace, love, respect for the earth, and mutual care. It encourages people to share resources, keep fires communal, avoid litter, and treat everyone with kindness. While simple and informal, the mini-manual captures the heart of the Rainbow philosophy, that the gathering is not an event organized for people, but a temporary village created by everyone who attends. These pages illustrate how shared ethics, rather than authority, hold the community together, showing that cooperation, responsibility, and respect for nature are the unwritten laws of Rainbow life. Rainbow Rap 107, Gathering Consciousness, includes one of the Rainbow family's most well-known community texts, often read aloud at gatherings to remind participants of shared values and environmental responsibility. Written in a poetic, almost spiritual tone, It serves as both a pledge and a meditation on how to live gently and respectfully during the event. It urges people to walk softly, avoid harming living things, protect water sources, and use only dead wood for fires. The message is simple but powerful. Everyone is a caretaker of the land and of one another. The rap reinforces the rainbow ideal that harmony with nature and kindness toward others are not abstract beliefs but daily practices. By opening and closing with calls to unity and love, it captures the emotional and ecological essence of the gathering, a temporary society grounded in peace, cooperation, and deep respect for the earth. Hipstory refers to the informal, living history of the hippie counterculture, as transmitted through personal stories, oral traditions, and multimedia accounts, particularly those surrounding the Rainbow family and its gatherings. It blends hippie and history to denote a narrative form that is experiential rather than institutional, privileging first-person memory, mythic retelling, and creative expression over linear or archival documentation. Within the Rainbow context, Hipstory serves as both an alternative historiography and a cultural continuity mechanism. It preserves the ideals, events, and personalities of the 1960s-1970s countercultural movements, from Haight-Ashbury and Woodstock to the first Rainbow Gathering, while emphasizing communal evolution, spiritual freedom, and lived mythology rather than strict factual chronologies.